And welcome everybody to another Bangers and Classics podcast. And that's with me, James Ruppert, and him, David Malloy. So let's find out what David's been up to, if he's there. Are you there, David?
I'm here. I've got company as well. We have a third member in the podcast this week. He is Alfie. He is a border collie. He belongs to a neighbour, and I'm looking after him while said neighbour is off at a wedding today. I think Alfie might make more sense than I make, so I might just turn over the microphone to him. I don't know what you think of that, James. A new podcast partner for
Woof,
you?
woof. Yeah, absolutely. No, yeah, I'd be quite happy with that.
Yeah, it's easier to feed as well, you know.
Is it
But
cheaper to run? Is it?
he's also housebroken. I'm not.
All right.
See, I saw yet another MX5, another lowered one with a hardtop. It's not the same one I've seen in the last couple of weeks. This one's different, and it was by the side of the road. It looks as if it had broken down. I wasn't sure if maybe the chap had just pulled over, but I thought, oh, it could be a breakdown there. I thought, dear God, they really are trying to emulate Lotus, aren't they? And again, of course, that's the Lotus of old, not the Lotus of the M100 either, because they never break down, of course. Well, I had 5 and they never left me stranded once. So, but I did see a Lotus as well. I saw the back end of a late model XL across from a supermarket in Prestwick. I've seen it there before. It's a nice Lotus Racing Green one. I suspect it belongs to the people who own the house and they keep it in a garage around the back. But it was sitting there looking very clean and tidy it was too. So, you know, I saw a car that wanted it so badly to be a Lotus, but wasn't. And I saw the genuine thing. So there you go. What have you seen, James?
I've seen quite a lot of stuff actually, David. A particular spot for you was actually a 70s Toyota Land Cruiser towing a boat.
All right.
And yeah, it was painted olive green, so there was like a military vibe going on with it. But it was a proper boat with a sail and all that sort of stuff. The sail wasn't raised, of course, but it was it was sort of a wooden boat. It wasn't a fiberglass job. So it was a proper old school pairing there.
They could have raised the sail, switched off the engine in the Land Cruiser, and just powered along. Yeah,
and gone the other way, couldn't they? Yeah,
exactly. And that is true green power.
Well, actually, there is actually some Giles cartoons which I must send you, which I think do exactly the same thing. The Giles cartoons had fabulous drawings of vehicles, a bit like the Tintin books. Actually, when old Giles drew cars, they were actually pretty good because he used to drive around the country in a Land Rover. I don't know if you know that. I don't know how we got here, but yeah, and he used to spend sort of weeks at a time sketching real people and real things. So that's why his cartoons were so good. I would say to anybody that actually that was part of my youth. If you actually want to know what was going on in a particular year, buy a Giles annual from that year, and you will know precisely all the big events because all the cartoons were not just funny, not just well drawn, but they will also, tell you, give you a very good background into what was going on at the time. You might disagree with that. I don't know.
No. I have healthy respect for cartoonists. Though I have to say, it didn't apply to everybody that I knew. I wasn't the only petrol head in my year at school. There were some other guys, and one of them, his father moved down to, I think it was Kenilworth, and a couple of the other lads went down one summer, or I think it was one autumn, would be, of course, and they went to the motor show together at the NEC.
Yeah.
And they found themselves near somewhere, I don't know if it was a book by Nibs or something to do with Nibs, the cartoonist. And they start slagging off Nibs, saying he's probably a decrepit old man, wears a seedy Mac, etc., blah, blah, blah. And the chap appears out of nowhere and says, "Good afternoon, lads. I'm Nibs." He'd heard every word they'd said, of course. They didn't know what to do. And it served him jolly well, right?
Absolutely.
Last week we talked about Princess Diana's Ford Escort. And I should have mentioned the story back then. Now, I'm not going to break any confidences by saying this because I never met the lady in question. I never saw the case file. I had no knowledge, as it turned out, of the case. But way back in 1996, Princess Diana's mother found herself in a little bit of hot water over a motoring charge. And her case was to proceed at Oban Sheriff Court. And she instructed the firm I worked for to represent her in the proceedings. And my boss said to me, and I don't think he was joking, David, you're just a very man. You can deal with this case. And I thought, oh, God, no, absolutely not. A press scrum outside, now I go and face that. I was quite young, youngish. I just not into that sort of thing. So fortunately, by the time things got to the court stage, I'd actually moved firms and moved on. But he did actually represent her in the case. But it so nearly could have been me if I hadn't got out of there. probably would have been me.
Never mind, David. I mean, that was your one sort of pitch at fame and fortune, and
No,
or
there
was
wasn't.
it?
No, there wasn't.
There are others, are
There
there?
was another occasion I had to leave the court via the bin shelter to dodge the press. I get given a hospital pass of a case. I can't tell you the details of it, but basically, one of my colleagues gave me this. I thought we shouldn't be going to court with it. I really didn't think it was a good idea at all. We weren't going to win it. We would have won it on the facts, I thought, on merit, but the type of case it was, you weren't going to find a sheriff or a judge that would find in our favour. And yeah, I was proven right. I thought, oh God, if I go out now, I'm going to get mobbed by the press here because they're waiting. I mean, I could see them at the front of the court, the cameras, etc. I saw this for Game of Soldiers. Somebody sneaked out via the bins out of Glasgow Sheriff Court that way. I think that was one of the things that made me question whether or not I wanted to still be a lawyer, I have to say. But yeah, that did happen. But anyway, back to the car spots.
Well, the only other thing, David, is you and I talk about bloodless coups and sometimes bloody coups,
Mm-hmm.
and the other day, I would assume that certainly towards Norwich there was one going on because it was military Land Rover after military Land Rover after military Jeep. There was a whole cavalcade of them. I sort of lost count after a while. But it was fairly spectacular. And I think if they wanted to regime change, they probably could have done it. Even though I didn't see any ordnance on board, they were certainly, it was nice to see them all ready and waiting. And then the next day, I saw it was basically Land Rovers and Discoveries all muddied up. They'd all obviously been off roading, so they were all bobtailed ones, so that they could get out of difficult situations, and there was about half a dozen of them, but they were all. I don't think it was spray on mud. I think it was proper mud, and it was quite nice to see that as well. So I've seen an awful lot of Land Rovers, and then very finally, which I sent you a picture of, David, because I know you like boats. I sent you a picture of a Rolls Royce,
Mm.
which was in spectacular. Now, I meant to look this up, and I just haven't had the time. It's quite a simple thing to look up, but I think it was a Mulliner Park Ward body on it,
Mm.
which is the four headlights at the front. But it was an absolutely massive, massive Rolls Royce, and in perfect condition. And the only
Mm.
thing I would have marked it down for is the wire wheels. But as I said to you, I think that's something for the butler to clean each night when you drove home. But it really was a lovely looking thing because you just do not see them.
Mm. Well, I have to say, I liked the wheels.
Mm.
I did like them. All you need from that, well, if you got one of those, all you need to add is French Riviera and you want Audrey Hepburn.
Oh yes, pretty
Now,
much.
of course, I mean, it's the kind of car that an Audrey Hepburn would be seen in, let's be honest. Very, very classy, very elegant. And yeah, I could just see you wafting around the French Riviera, Mr. Muppet, with your guitars in the back.
Well, could do or either that or Joanne from the Renault 25 ad. I do hold a light for her at that
Yeah.
she might want to go for a spin at some point, but never mind.
Yes, well, we shall move on from that before we get you into any more hot water, my boy. Anyway, we shall take a break. Are you tired, exhausted, or having trouble with your big end? Well, if so, you've come to the right place. Bangers and Classics, the podcast that refreshes parts that you didn't even know existed. Welcome back after that short break. We're now going to announce a new competition. Now, I'm sure you've all been glued to your seats watching Euro 2020 or 2021, except for viewers in Scotland who've been hiding behind the sofa as usual, I'm sorry to say. But along that theme, we'll come up with an idea in which 16 nations will each enter a car, be a knockout competition, and the nations are going to be, now, had to work on the basis that we can only produce entries from car producing nations. So here they are. We have Austria, the Czech Republic, England. Will they get a traditionally easy draw or will they have a tough one for a change? France, Germany, Holland, Italy, the Azzurri, of course, Northern Ireland, Poland, Romania, Russia, Scotland. Will they actually make it past the first round? Well, we'll have to wait and see. Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, and Wales. And the idea will be that it'll be a knockout contest. First round, the first week will be effectively 8 matches between two countries, and next week will be 4, 2, and then 1, and they'll get an overall champion. Please don't vote on nationalistic grounds. Vote on the basis of the cars. It's just a bit of fun, not to be taken too seriously. And I think James and I will come up with a prize for it. I'm sure we will. We'll give you more details when it launches on Twitter, or we'll probably run through those next week, and we'll launch it just after that. So what do you think, James? Think that's a...
Well, I think it's all terribly exciting, but obviously, dear listeners, this is something that David does, because David is very, very good at coming up with ideas for competitions, and he does like a knockout cup. So all the credit goes to him, and I just sit on the sidelines and make sarcastic remarks, really, and I don't really contribute very much to it at all. But just make sure you pick one of David's books when it comes to the prize. So
it might not be. I might have something entirely different lined
Oh,
up.
really?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Possibly. Yes, that's it. Well, as long as you're in charge of taking penalties, James will be fine.
I was very good. I was certainly very good at giving away penalties. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, I wasn't much of a footballer or anything really. I think I once got a game of substitute spectator or something like that. I don't know. My uncle was a very good player, as I mentioned before, but I was rubbish.
Yeah.
More of a rugby player. But anyway, that's coming soon. But in the meantime, what are we going to turn to? Bang Our Classic. And after being hit over the head with a picture frame by you last week, James, I thought, let's go with the Triumph Dolomite for this week's Bang Our Classic. And since you owned a couple, I think you should be the man to make the case for it being a classic.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, that, because some I had sort of broke down in fairly spectacular fashion. And oddly enough, my dad had one that I eventually ended up using, and it was an 1850. And he was in Scotland, strangely enough, David. He was in your neck of the woods. And the gearbox started to spout oil. And I have still got hydraulic fluid from that fateful day when he bought basically an entire garage's supply of it so he could get home, because all he was doing was topping it up, and he thought, well, I'm not going to break down, it's going to take forever to get home. And he bought, and it was it may still have the garage markings on it, actually, but I've still got a few bottles of it left, and so that's the only way that he could make it home in that Triumph Dolomite. And actually, many years later, I had exactly the same thing happen, where and I've got a feeling, I presume it was a Get Drag box. I haven't researched it, obviously, but I don't know. They must be terrible automatic gearboxes. Yeah, automatic gearboxes, people. How terrible is that? But it suited the car fairly well, really. In many ways, a Dolomite. It was designed by the same person who did the 3 Series, and you can either think, well, yeah, it does look okay, or it doesn't. But I think it was quite a smart, upright sort of car. Fairly narrow, but it had a nice bit of wood inside. It was quite a comfortable drive, and rear wheel drive. I know you're going to go on about the Toledo version where it was front wheel drive, and it was a very confused marketing policy. As we all know, British Leyland were pretty much mad at the time and didn't really know what they were doing. But it was a pretty nice car to drive. The ones I had didn't rust very much. They were sort of okay, really, which was good. And apart from that, I just think they're okay. I mean, everybody goes on about the sprint version, although you could have overheating problems with that engine. It was a pretty good car. My old colleague Roger Bell used to drive that in the British Touring Car Championship. Actually,
Tony John as well, didn't he?
Yeah, that's right.
Tony John definitely drove the Dolomite.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. And they drove it with some success. So yeah, it could be hustled around, a track very usefully. But I found actually an 1850 or even a 1500, which I had, HL, was a pretty nice car. Actually, it was quite a comfortable car. It was a sort of a bijou little saloon from the 70s, really. And I suppose that's me. I'm a bijou saloon from the 70s, so it suits me very well. But to me, it's a classic, but I'm sure you'll disagree with that at some point.
Well, I'll come to that. But going back to the engine, it also was used in Formula 3 back in the day. You remember the Unipart team with the Union Jack liveried cars. I think Tiffany Dill might have driven that at one stage, and possibly even Nigel Mansell. I may be wrong about Mansell, but but I'm pretty sure Tiffany Dale drove the Dolomite Sprint powered F3 car. I don't think it was too successful, unfortunately. Up against, I think it was mainly the Toyota, probably Toyota Nova motor. I think they were up against at that time in F3. Issues I have with the Dolomite was British Leyland doing what they did, rehashing something and making it a complete, dog's breakfast of it. Dolomite really started out life as a front-wheel drive car, the 1300, 1500, 1965. And it looked fine then with its Michelotti pen lines, all-round independent suspension, front disc brakes, etc. It was quite a nice little car. But the engine mounting was longitudinal, not transverse. It wasn't terribly space efficient. Then Triumph went along, they waited a few years, and they brought out the Toledo. But this is where it all goes a bit strange, that they decided to throw away front-wheel drive, which I think was a mistake, re-engineered the car to be rear-wheel drive, made some various fairly minor changes apart from engineering, obviously, and they produced that. And then they made a bigger engine version, which became the Dolomite. But by the time the Dolomite appeared, the car was 7 years old, and it went on for a further 8. Against the opposition from abroad, particularly the BMWs, it just wasn't up to the task. The sprints, back in the day in the Touring Car Championship were great. Thoroughly supported them. I remember, I think Jerry Marshall raced one as well at one point. Anyone who liked motor racing in the 70s would have liked Jerry Marshall for all sorts of reasons, not just the fact that he was a terrific driver, but also he was a terrific personality. He drove a Dolly Sprint. And as you say, Roger Bell, Tony John, so some great drivers. But going back to the road car, I just thought it looks staid, it looks old, it's not evolving. It's really rooted in a previous decade, and that was the issue for me with it. It had a certain amount of class, it had a certain amount of character to it. Of course it did. It wasn't a complete flop, but I just don't feel that it was a great car. I think by the time they brought out the Dolomite, so much time had passed that its time really had come and gone, before it ever had a chance. So I'm going to say, unfortunately, I can't say it's a classic. I'm not going to label it with the banger tag either, because I don't feel that's fair. But I just don't see it as being a copper bottom classic. So there we go. You want to change my mind on that?
It's pointless, isn't it, David? I mean,
you can hit me with another picture frame.
I could do, couldn't I? Really, but no. You're entitled to your own opinion. I mean, however wrong-headed it is, David.
Not very. No, it's the Dolomite. It's just never done it for me, I'm afraid, guys. There were better cars available from other manufacturers, and that's just the reality of it. It could have been a great car if it had been produced several years before, but for various reasons, it didn't come out until the 70s, and by then, I think other cars had surpassed it, and it was really living in the past. Anyway, I suspect I'll be in a minority there, which I'm not too fussed about. That's part of the fun. And anyway, we're going to take a break. You're listening to Bangers and Classics, home of the Banger Vision Car Contest and the European Classic Nations Cup. So, while we are recording this, our first practice for this year's British Grand Prix is taking place.
Right.
It's a different format this weekend. We're not going to get into that because, we'll maybe talk about it after it's been and gone. But what I'd like to talk about is the things that were great about Formula One and that we've lost, and perhaps some of the things about Formula One that weren't so good that we've now got. And if I can kick us off, the first thing I'd say that I miss about Formula One in the old days was the ease of spectator access to the paddock. After the race, you could get in, you could be among the mechanics and the drivers. Obviously, you had to behave with respect, and certainly, in my experience, people did. You behaved yourself appropriately, you didn't make a nuisance of yourself. It was a privilege and you treated it as such. But you were able to get in and soak up the atmosphere. And that was a big part of it for me. Just you felt part of the event. The other thing, I suppose, is noise. This is a common complaint of fans nowadays. The modern cars, they don't really make a very great noise. That they're not the most sonorous of devices. If you go back to the early 70s, you had the Matra V12, you had the Ferrari V12, you had the Alfa Flat 12 came along, and of course you had the Cosworth DFE, and I nearly forgot there, you had the BRM V12 as well, all of which made a terrific racket. You would drink in the sound and it would enhance the experience, it would add to the atmosphere of the event. If you're walking across to the stands or whatever before the race started, the cars were going out and warm-up laps, just the sound of it, you would feel a real sense of anticipation before the race started. Now, not so much. So that's a couple of things I think we miss. What about you, James?
Well, I mean, you're right on all those points, David. The old days were better. And I'll be very controversial then here. I actually miss the fag packet liveries myself. I really do. Absolutely think they just looked brilliant. All of the liveries, I mean, even things like Revlon, which you couldn't smoke, which were all great. And I will make a point actually about this is that I was a very big fan of Formula One back in the day and all that sort of stuff. I was surrounded by cigarettes when I was younger. You know, I used to be in smoke-filled rooms. You know, all my relatives smoked. I mean, at Christmas time, you couldn't see one end of the room from the other because everyone was smoking. But you know, I was surrounded by um, you know, all this advertising and promote, and yet I've never smoked. So I don't know what went wrong there. I don't know whether I had an aversion therapy, but I see nothing wrong with that. I mean, if somebody wants to put whatever they want on a racing car, I don't care. I just want to see them go fast around the track, but I also want to see a cool livery, and you won't see anything better than a JSP, will you? Logo, or even the Gold Leaf Team Lotus cars, which I thought looked really, really good as well. And all the Marlboro ones. I know I'm going down the wrong route here, which won't help us to monetize this podcast. As I say, it's all about smoking death sticks. But no, that's the. I suppose in a way that was symbolic of the time. I think there was a few. Uh, Beer logos as well. Skoll, wouldn't they? I think
Hmm?
sponsor them as well. And the London Rubber Company, I think,
Yep,
invested in Surtees,
they
didn't
did.
they,
That was
for a while?
controversial,
It was, wasn't it,
mm.
at the time?
But
Um,
not as controversial as Penthouse.
no, that's right.
Remember the Penthouse was on it?
I
Yeah.
do very much so.
And
Absolutely.
also, sorry to interrupt, James, but
Yeah.
I'll forget if I don't say
Yeah.
ABBA.
Mm.
ABBA. Here we go. Political accent. It's in the book of mine. It's the ultimate unofficial F1 quiz book, but it tells the story of this a Swedish driver who did some work in the studio. I don't think he actually appeared in the albums with ABBA. Became an F1 driver. A guy called Tommy Borgud. And for a couple of races in I think it was 82, it was 81 or 82 anyway, from memory, I haven't bothered checking this up again. He drove for the ATS team, and on the side pods of his car was ABBA. They didn't pay for it, but they allowed him to use it to try and drum up some sponsorship. So you had that on it. I mean, I just couldn't see, you couldn't see rock bands nowadays or pop bands having the logo on a Formula One car, but back 40 years ago we did. That was cool.
It was very, very cool indeed. In fact, I did see the other day, I saw a picture of a current Formula One car. It was next to a late 90s, I think. It may have even been an early 2000s. That's how little I know about uh, Formula One cars of recent years. But it was just the sheer size of the cars now. They're just like longer than a London bus, aren't they? They're just
Mm,
absolutely huge things. And again, that's something that we seem to miss. And also, cars, I know they do end up looking pretty similar, but again, I think there were far more distinctive shapes. There were
mm,
there was a lot more engineering going on where people say, "Oh, we'll try that this week," rather than everything looking exactly the same,
mm.
in the same corporate logo styly, in effect.
We had the shovel-nosed Ferrari they called a snowplow.
Mm.
I think it was the B3 from memory, but I could be wrong. There was the Tyrrell six-wheeler car.
Yep.
Williams also tested one, so did March, and also Ferrari. Carlos Reutemann, to whom we paid tribute last week, did quite a
Mm.
bit of testing in the Ferrari six-wheeler. They were all different, as you say, shapes of cars. And
Mm.
that's what made it great. The variation in liveries now, I'm like you, James, I've never smoked them. I don't like it as a habit, I have to say.
Mm.
I'm dead against it, really. But the variation of liveries was great,
Yeah.
I have to say. And you got cars that look genuinely interesting.
Mm.
And the livery was one of the things that made them distinctive, but also the shape. Nowadays, they tend to look very similar. And it's a little bit unfortunate. If you stripped a car of its livery now, you might be hard pressed to tell a Williams from, say, an AlphaTauri. I mean, obviously, real Formula One nuts, yeah, could tell the difference straight away, but the average viewer probably couldn't. It'd be quite difficult for them to do so. But you go back to the early 80s even, and you took the logos off, say, on a Sella and off a Renault, you'd know which was which straight away. There'd be no
Yeah,
bother at all to spot.
absolutely. Yeah, I
And that,
mean, it is things like the air boxes, isn't it? The air box was different, and
mm,
as you say, the front air dams were
mm,
different. Yeah, because people were doing different things, and they
mm,
were allowed to do different things,
yeah.
and obviously that's what missing. In fact, I did speak to a young Formula One fan the other day, who actually my nephew, and I bored into tears about the Pro Car series, in that
Mm,
which was a great series which ran for a couple of seasons, didn't it? Where they were all put in identical M1 supercars and left to their own
yeah.
devices,
They
and that's
certainly did, yeah, they
yeah.
certainly ran it in 79. Do you know who won that championship?
Um, I thought it was whoever won the Formula One.
No,
Did
no,
Clay did Clay win it? That's all.
no, no,
No,
no.
that's a shame.
No, it wasn't Clay. I was the other day. Clay won Williams' first Grand Prix, though. It was Nicky Lauda.
Oh, it was it?
Yeah, Nicky won it. He wasn't even bothered about racing in Formula One that year. His performances were not great by and large,
Yeah.
and he walked away before the end of the season.
Mm,
Um, but for some reason, he just took to pro car, and you saw really, the intelligence of Lauda and the skill, because I don't think Lauda was the most naturally gifted of racing drivers. I have to say, he was obviously very, very good, but I don't find too many, if any, that were smarter than him. Very, very clever man. Um, very much a guy I would have liked to have had a beer with, I think, Nicky
mm,
Lauda.
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, my favourite of the day was Gilles Villeneuve,
Yeah.
who I think was the fastest driver. I've
Mm,
never seen anyone really that could do things in a racing car that he did, but everyone's got their own favourites and everyone's got their own ideas, and that's not a bad thing. It's a conversation piece for a start. Um, but yeah, going back to things we miss, obviously proper circuits. They've emasculated a few of them now. Some of it's in the name of safety, which I approve of, and some of it is just I don't know what they're playing at. They're just boring to watch, and combined with the type of cars we've got nowadays, overtaking is very difficult. Other thing is, nowadays spectators are herded. As I've indicated, you can't really get into the paddock. You're kind of like cattle to a large degree. That wasn't the case in the old days.
it is a corporate bore fest now, and the drivers don't seem to have any personality whatsoever. They've got interchangeable caps that they wear, and that's about it. Really, I'm extremely bored by it all.
Yeah, I mean it's sad because some of the drivers I'm sure are very interesting people, but
I don't know whether they are, David.
mm,
I really struggle with that one because an awful lot of the drivers that we know and love from our era sort of had lives.
I
They
suppose they were
actually did
older when
lots
they
of stuff. They
well,
were older.
yeah,
Yeah.
they were older when they went to
Mm.
became a Grand Prix driver
Yeah.
some time ago, probably about 40, 50 years ago. A driver would be in his late 20s,
Mm.
27, 29,
Yeah.
something like that, before he got to Formula One.
Mm.
There were exceptions to that, of course, but they'd had a life before it. They'd
Mm.
had experiences out with racing, and they carried that forward. And in general terms, they were harder to manage, let's be honest, but it worked pretty well. And there was a great deal more camaraderie between them in the old days than there seems to be nowadays. There was genuine affection between the drivers. Some didn't get on, but for by and large, they were rivals, but they were friends. And you got a sense that they appreciated what they were doing was special, and they were privileged to do it. It wasn't a sense of entitlement. It was a sense of, well, I'm very lucky to do this. I'm going to damn well make sure that I enjoy it. And because of that, that came out in their personality. There's one thing, though, I have to say that I don't miss about Formula One. I'm sure you know what that is.
Don't know, David. Go on, surprise me.
Safety, the very
Yeah.
poor approach to safety in the old
Oh,
days.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
Nobody. Yeah.
yeah,
Anybody who says they enjoy crashes are a
no,
very strange creature. No, it was a, and also from our era.
mm,
I mean, there would be two or three drivers who would not make it to the end of a season, and that was
mm,
regarded as pretty much standard. For the time, which when you think about it now is
yeah,
very very awful. Really, I mean, it's quite a
mm,
shock if someone's injured.
yeah.
Um, these days it's extremely rare, and that's actually a good thing.
Mm. Well, I did a thing a while ago and looked at drivers who competed in the I think it was 1966 season. Could be wrong. I mean, it's a while ago since I did this, and I sort of tracked what happened to them. And I think something like 40% of them were killed in racing cars. Not all in Formula One, not all in races, some were in testing. But something like 15 out of the 40 of them were killed. And that's a very high proportion.
Mm.
I'd like a sport that had the best parts of both the safety of the modern era and the character and slightly wild, slightly anarchic approach of yesteryear. Put the two together and you've got something special, I think. Let's just take a break here. You're listening to Bangers and Classics. presented by the two men most wanted by Interflora for crimes against podcasting. Join us for the last section of the podcast, and it's a battle today between two classic 1980s hot hatches. In one corner, we have the Renault 5 GT Turbo, and in the other, we have the much proclaimed champion, the Peugeot 205 GTI. But which do we think is the better, James?
Well, I don't know really. It depends. It depends what you like. I mean, it's from very much an era of the hot hatch. When I was driving lots of cars in a professional capacity, actually, I used to do work for a Renault dealer network. I used to produce all their communications to Renault dealers. So actually, I had quite a lot of access to Renaults of the time, which included Renault 11 turbos and all sorts of other things. And yeah, the 5 GT Turbo. To me, it just always seemed as though it was trying a bit too hard. Whether it's the body kit, whether it's the turbo, which it's just another thing to go wrong or go bang or leave lots of smoke out of the back. So the Renault Turbo, I quite like the idea of, but I think on a day to day basis, and having driven quite a few 205 GTIs, which was quite a light French car, but it really did feel as though it was alive, and that I quite liked. I would always go for the Pug over the Renault, but I don't know whether I'm being controversial or not.
I don't think you're being controversial, James. No, I had a couple of Renault turbos back in of that era.
Mm,
Two 11 turbos, one with the original 105 horsepower engine, one with the slightly souped up and very much smoother and less laggy 115 horsepower engine. And I have to say the engines were terrific. They were a
mm.
lot stronger than people gave them credit for. 5 GT Turbo did suffer from one thing with its turbo installation, and that was fuel vaporization. Hot starting could be an issue. Oddly, the 11 really wasn't affected by it. I don't recall ever having serious problems with it in that sense. But I'm going to be controversial and say I prefer the 5. I think the 205 GTI is a great car. And we're comparing, in my view, two great cars here. 205 GTI, it looks great. It goes well. The 1.9 back in the day, well, it did have a tendency to throw the unwary off backwards into hedges. Need a bit of lift off oversteer. Not so much in the 5 GT Turbo, though a friend of mine did spin his in the roundabout once, uh, which he took a while to live down. The thing about the Renault was it was just a hoot to drive. The turbo installation on it was very good. It was a very smooth installation. It wasn't very laggy. It was very smooth. It's light to rev, and you had it was beautiful in the sense that you'd part throttle surge. If you've ever driven a turbo installation of that era, you know what I'm talking about. You give it part throttle, and it just shoots forward like a train. You're not giving it full revs or full throttle. It just feels really special. It almost feels effortless. I loved that about it. I think it handled very well. I think it had a bit more grip than the 205, though it did perhaps have the same level of feel as the 205. 205 was a car that you could think into a corner almost. The 5 needed a little bit more work, but I think if you really pushed it, it would probably hang on a little bit better. And back in the day, that's what people did. They did push these cars to extremes, which explains why insurance premiums shot up so much back in the day. So, I mean, it's a close run thing. They were two of the best of many great hot hatches. The buyer back in the 80s of a hot hatch was the winner because they had so many to choose from, and there were some great cars right across the spectrum. The 205's reputation has endured better than that of the 5, and I think that's because of the 5's turbo. Not because it was unreliable, because in my experience it was anything but unreliable. It's just because the max power guys got their hands on it and tuned it. And they put far too much boost through it, and of course the engine couldn't take it, it went bang. 205 you couldn't tune to that extent, didn't have a turbo. And therefore, it didn't get the name of being a car that went bang a lot. Whereas the 5, in standard guys had plenty of power, but for some people that's never enough. They got a hold of them, cranked them up to 12, and well, the results were spilled all over the road.
Yeah, I think you put that very eloquently there, David. Even though you might have come to the wrong conclusion.
No, not really. I really like both cars. That's the thing. I appreciate both cars to a very great degree, and I suppose the answer would be have one of each.
Absolutely.
I would probably go for, if it was 205, I'd go for a later model 1.6 with 115 horsepower engine, and it would have to be one colour only. That'd be Miami blue. If it was a 5 GT turbo, I'd probably go for the dark blue Raider specification, same as a friend of mine had, and just avoid driving it like like he did round roundabouts. I know some people will disagree and say that the Peugeot is so much better, but I think you're wrong, guys. I think they're both terrific. Well, that's all for this week. James has got to dash off to get his oil changed, and I'm off to walk a dog. So until next time, thanks for listening, and hope you enjoyed the podcast.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm just going to collect Monica Vitti and I'm off to the post office.